Good evening, everyone. My name is Ryan Canister, and I currently work as the Fine Arts Manager for the Department of Communication Arts, Theater, and Art at Gordon College. I want to thank you all so much for joining us tonight at our second annual Fine Arts Festival. Tonight's workshop is the final of 5 total sessions that have been happening this summer. Each workshop/session has been hosted by a different alum from our department or a group of alums, and they've all been talking about their areas of expertise and just what they've been up to since graduation. We've had a lot of great sessions this summer, so be sure to check out our full schedule and go back and watch any of the recordings at gordon.edu/fineartsfest. And tonight we have a great panel discussion about what it's like being a communication arts major after graduation. So we are joined tonight, our panelists are Megan Bandy, who is a content strategist at Eleanor Health, Shaulita Francis, who is a communication and marketing coordinator at the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute, and Christina Rowling, who is a digital marketing specialist at Sight and Sound Theaters. And our moderator for this evening is Dr. Christine Gardner, who's the chair for the Department of Communication Arts, Theater, and Art. And I think Dr. Gardner has had all of our panelists in class before, so she should have some great questions for us tonight, and we should be getting some great answers as well. So without further ado, I will turn things over to Dr. Gardner.
Thank you, Ryan. Yeah, and with that setup, I'm just thinking I should have come prepared with like test questions, right? Like to really quiz you on things we learned way back when in school. Hey, everyone, thanks for joining the conversation, and special thanks to Megan and Shaulita and Christina for joining tonight on this final session of our Fine Arts Festival. So as a college professor, one of the great joys, in addition to teaching students in the classroom, is getting to talk with them after they have graduated. And that's what we're doing tonight. So this is really actually a treat for me and all of you who have found us on the website or joining us tonight. You just got to listen in on this conversation. Just a joy to get to talk to some of our recent alums about what they have been doing in the area of communication arts, and just to get a little insight on that field currently today, and maybe here's some advice for current students to like what they need to be studying now and how they can best get into these various fields. So let's start, and Ryan, I know I had already introduced each of you in your job titles, but let's start there. And if each of you in turn could just like unpack that a little bit for us, like tell us the title again, where you're working, and just give us a little bit of understanding of the kind of work you do, maybe like a day in the life, if that's helpful for us to understand what it is that you do in this, in your particular field. Megan, do you mind starting us out, and then Shaulita and Christina?
Yeah, I definitely don't mind. So I'm Megan. I am currently a content strategist at a company called Eleanor Health, which is essentially an outpatient addiction treatment center. And it's a startup, so focused on whole person care and evidence-based treatment. So my job as a content strategist mainly involves planning the strategy for like content that we create, whether that's like digital content through blog posts or social posts, or in-clinic content like brochures or trifolds, or mailing content that we use to advertise to people, or radio spots and TV spots. And it's pretty broad range, but I really enjoy that kind of work. So I'm always a fan of startups for that reason, because you get to try a little bit of everything. So that's sort of what I'm doing here, and I'm really enjoying it so far. So anybody else can go next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shaulita Francis, and as of today, I am the Communications and Marketing Manager. So I'm very excited about that shift and to see how my department at the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute is going to be growing and going to be changing. And so at the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute, we are... Let me see how I want to put this. So our mission and our vision is to transform the way society responds to homicide. And so a lot of our work is in the immediate aftermath of a homicide happening and the healing work with the family when they experience a homicide. And so what I do is that I get to oversee our communications department. Any external communication we have, I oversee that, I manage that. I've done a lot of work with our social media and just finding creative ways to tell our story as an organization, ways that are engaging, ways that are impactful, powerful, but also not what's the word I'm looking for? Not degrading or capitalizing or monetizing off people's stories, but really honoring and empowering people's voices. And that looks so different. That looks like press releases, op-eds, social media content, email content, website planning, and the list goes on and on and on. And so that's just a short snippet of the work that I do within the Boston, and not even Boston, the whole Massachusetts community. Thank you.
It's my
Christina,
turn.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I'm Christina. I am a digital marketing specialist for Sight and Sound Ministries as a whole, actually. So part of my role is to help to oversee our digital marketing strategy across our emails, our websites, and our social media. There's 2 locations. So part of it is also keeping track of what the other location needs and is doing and making sure that it all tells the whole picture and the whole story of what Sight and Sound is. For those who don't know, Sight and Sound theaters is what people think of the most when they think of Sight and Sound. And there's 2 locations, and the main goal was to bring the Bible to life. So they do a lot of Bible stories on a huge, like 300-foot wraparound stage, and a lot of other things as well. So that's a little bit of what I do. I feel like I'm missing something, but
No, that's good. No, that gives us a good start. No, that's great. Thanks to each of you. And just before we jumped on this session, we each were trying to figure out where each other was, like physically your location. It just give us a quick, just tell us where you are like right now. Where are you talking to us from? Christina, so you said Pennsylvania.
Yep, I'm talking to you from Lancaster County, Pennsylvania.
Nice. And Shaulita, where are you?
I'm from Dorchester, Boston.
That's right.
And then I am currently working out of Lexington, Kentucky, but my job's remote. So that is just great.
Fully remote.
Fully remote. Yeah.
So this is your life, what we're doing right now.
This is exactly, yep. Maybe not like being recorded, but
Well,
this
there you
is
go.
definitely something I'm used to for sure.
Excellent. So what would you say for each of you excites you about your work? Because this is the thing, and we all get this, like sometimes first jobs out of college, or maybe for some of you, this is second or third, or you've had a few. There's always going to be some stuff that you don't like, just have to stuff. We all have that in our work. But what would you say are the elements of your work that it's the piece that you get up and out of bed for in the morning? Can you identify some of those things for us? What excites you about your work? Any of you, feel free to just jump on in.
I can go first. So I think I want to answer that question in 2 parts. So specifically my role as a communications manager, I think the ability to just understand an organization, think strategically, and just be creative. Just being like, okay, this is something we want to communicate. How can we do it in a way that's going to grab attention? Specifically for my job and the organization in which I work at, I am just so grateful for the opportunity to be at an organization that understands work-life balance, but not only that really prioritizes our healing, our social emotional growth, and teaches the value of peace. And you can ask for a better place to work at right out of college. And I've grown so much emotionally as well as in skill and expertise at this organization.
That's great. Thanks, Shaulita.
Yeah, I love that answer because I feel like I relate a lot to that. The way I want to answer this question is by saying that I didn't love the last job that I was at before this, and I think it was a lot more e-commerce centered, and I had a harder time feeling passionate about the work I was doing when it felt like my entire job was like selling someone on a product and like manipulating the language so that it convinced someone to buy something. And now I feel a lot more motivated by the place I work for, because a conversion for us is getting someone into treatment for an addiction that's really affecting their life. And that feels way more rewarding. And the way I feel like I can contribute to that is more fulfilling and more of a reason to get up in the morning. So I very much think that it's about the place that you work and not necessarily the job that you do, for sure.
Yeah, I feel that too. I think one of the things I'm really passionate about in this job in particular is the mission of Sight and Sound. And I love being able to be part of it, to invite people to an experience that so often impacts their life, and especially their relationship with Jesus is amazing. Shaulita was talking about the work-life balance, and that's something I also appreciate working here. And what else? I like also seeing everyone's positive, well, not everyone, but mostly all the positive experiences that people have, and being able to invite people into this experience through all of the words that I labor over, and all of the strategy that we so diligently tried to set up and look back and evaluate to inform decisions, to inform decisions going forward. So I think that's a huge part of it. It's just being part of their mission and seeing people really like take the message to heart and go home and share it with others. And yeah, changes people's, well, not changes people's lives, but definitely helps.
Well, I think what the three of you just shared, that's all great marketing pitches for anyone watching this conversation to go work at the various places where you all work. They all sound fantastic. But as we all know, there's always a downside to not just particular jobs, excuse me, but I want to talk more broadly about just the communication industry in general. And Megan, you kind of touched on this, I think, in terms of the job you worked at previously, and it sounds like all of you have some work that's touching on like digital marketing or social media content production, like that kind of stuff, that there can be a side of that that does feel manipulative, or trying to push people to buy, or to do something. What would you say is maybe one of the biggest challenges that you can see working in kind of broadly the communication industry? So it could be something specific to like the job you're doing, or if you have any insights, just challenges in general in this industry, things that you might be facing. Yeah, feel free, anyone jump on in.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to answer because I definitely think that there are a lot of challenges. I think it depends on the job you're doing. So I'll focus more specifically. I do a lot of content writing, and that's sort of like where I started. And I think for me, as far as what ends up being worse about that is it's sort of like a double-edged sword. Either some people don't think that your work is very valuable, so you're not paid very well at some places. Again, it's very dependent on the place, because anybody who really knows what they're doing knows that that work is valuable and will pay you well. So don't take bad pay, but some people will just shoot you low, and you won't get paid well. You'll be kind of overworked. They expect you to just churn through content very quickly. So you become sort of a content mill, and you feel like nothing that you create is valuable. And at the other end, there are people who take it so seriously that everything needs to bring in a certain number of views, or lead to a certain number of clicks, or lead to a certain number of purchases. And if that's not working right, then we need to reevaluate the keywords that we're using. And it can all feel very stale and kind of pointless if you're not driven for the reason that you're writing. And so I think that that's definitely the biggest drawback, is that a lot of positions are at companies that I don't stand by the mission. I'm not pro buy everything as soon as you see it because you read a cool blog that said it sounded fun. So kind of working in an industry where your entire job is to convince someone to do something. If you're not motivated by what the company stands for, then it's not going to be a fun job for you. So that's, I think, the biggest drawback. But it's always just find a place that works for you. And the upside, I think it's a big trend with people our age and younger, to not stick around if a company isn't working out for them. So you can feel comfortable finding another job or working for yourself, freelance. That's a great option too. So definitely see what else is out there, and don't be discouraged by that stuff either.
No, that's great advice, Megan. And have any of you done freelance work? Has that been a part of your careers thus far? Megan, you've done that?
Yeah, a little bit. That was actually
Okay.
how I got my first job. Was I started freelancing and then I worked a contracted role for them into a full-time job. And honestly, it was pretty solid being contracted. The only thing is the taxes are different, and that can bite you in the butt if you're not prepared for it. So
Good advice. Christina or Shaulita, have any of you done freelance work?
I'm starting to develop my consultation business on the side. So
Okay. Well, let's get back to that question, because I want to hear from the two of you about those challenges in the industry. Shaulita, do you want to take that one?
yes, so I really want to do justice with this response. And so I'm going to take my time, so bear with me. I think one of the biggest challenges that I experience and I'm constantly being faced with is stigmatizing people, specifically in the field that I work when it comes to homicide. So a lot of people, when we think of homicide, specifically being from Dorchester and working in Dorchester, we picture it as a Black issue or Black on Black crime. And so having that, right? Having that, and then also having to ask for money, especially from donors who are mostly white and affluent and stuff like that, is always trying to find that way of how do I angle the story where we're not being like, oh, poor these people. Because at the end of the day, the reality is homicide is not just a Black issue, right? It is a systematic issue, right? And it's like, I'm constantly challenged as I work with development is how do we frame the story, one, to make the people that we serve seem empowered, not seem empowered because they are empowered and they are turning their pain into action and they're not woe is me. But we do need to find funding to fund our program. So how do we frame it in a way where they're not being stigmatized, where it's not just one people group, and we educate people on the real issue and who it's impacting. And so that is one of my biggest challenges, making sure when we write to donors, when we tell the stories of survivors, we are honoring them, we are honoring their voices, their lived experiences, and not stigmatizing them. And it kind of reminds me of that commercial where it's like with the in the eyes of the angels or something like that. I can't remember, with the animals. And it's like, no, this is not the people we're serving aren't that. They aren't hopeless. And so it's constantly reminding myself that, working with the development team to make sure that they're aware of that. It's a constant check and balance between communications and development to make sure that is not the story we're telling.
Oh, Shelley, that's fantastic. I think is it Sarah McLachlan? Was that the one the singer, right? And the
Yeah.
dogs or the pets? Yes. No, I totally hear you on that. Back in the day, before I got into academia, I was a communications director for World Concern. It's an international Christian relief and development agency. And I know exactly what you're talking about. Back in the day, you used to call it like relief porn, right? Like you'd see like these, it was always like an African child, right? The bloated belly and the flies in the eyes. And because you think it's a good end, trying to raise money, but oh, what are we doing in the process? And yeah, really big challenges, I think, for those in these kinds of areas of communication where you are trying to help people, but the way in which we do it, it's a difficult balance for sure. Christina, how about you? What about the challenges that you see in the communication industry through your work?
One challenge is keeping things fresh in a sense. I know right now I'm working for theater, and we run the same show for 10 months. And so we're talking about one show for 10 months. And then it goes to the other location, and then we talk about it for another year or so. And so that's one challenge, is just to keep, just to figure out how can we keep this interesting for ourselves, but then also for the people who are engaging with us on the various platforms, so that they stay engaged, whether they've seen the show or not, whether they've engaged with us online through the streaming platform or not. How do we keep everybody interested for such an extended period of time? Another challenge is, this is hard work, planning multiple posts a day for months at a time, having people review it, going back and forth about words and what direction do we want to take this particular post and what words do we use. I enjoy the conversations, but at times it can get tiring. So that's another challenge, is is that. And the other thing is just to keep up too with the rapid changes in digital communications. So I hope you all can hear me because you all froze, but
We can still hear you. Yes, you froze on this end, but we still got your voice.
I follow Marketing Brew. I follow like Ad Age, social media today. Like, so I try to keep up with some of the changes that are happening as digital media.
Christina, it is popping just a bit. Let me toss this to our other panelists because you're actually given a really good lead in to the next question I wanted to ask, which is trends in the field. So all three of you have, graduated a few years ago. So maybe some of these things you studied at Gordon, but now you're actually doing this. You're on the front lines of the communication industry. What are some of the trends that you're seeing, whether it's in digital media marketing, social media content production, these kinds of fields that you're working in? Any new trends that we should all be aware of, especially for students who might be thinking of getting into these industries?
It's tough. I almost want to say that there's a trend now of sort of being anti-trends. Like, I feel like if we had done these jobs like 5 years ago, social media would have been the trend, but now it's just sort of like mandatory. Like, it doesn't necessarily boost your business a ton. It's just like, if you don't do social media, people won't trust you. Like, it's just kind of required to build a certain level of trust, but I wouldn't say that it's something new and exciting to get into. I think what might just be new and exciting is because those of us who have been doing this, or those of us who are older than we are and have been doing it a little bit longer, have seen enough of like the trends that there's almost a shift back to just focusing on quality and focusing on like what the audience wants to hear. Or like, if you're writing a blog post or a social post, what's a way to actually like get to what they want to know, not necessarily like convince them that this is what they want to know, but like, what are they actually looking for? So I think probably 5 years ago, even to like a couple years ago, everything is so SEO oriented. So what are people searching for? And how can we fit those keywords into a post? But now it's, why are people searching for those terms, so that we can predict maybe what they'll search in the future and just ultimately what they're looking for. Because in the end, like, Google is going to prioritize the most helpful posts, not the ones that strategically have the keywords throughout, but like the ones that people actually wanted to read in the first place. So I think, if that makes sense, I do think that there is a pushback on this sort of trendiness of like hashtags not working. They don't do anything. Like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, they're mandatory, but they're not trendy. So I think I'm just a fan of like, whatever is trendy right now, just focus on quality and content and like doing your best work. And I think it'll be rewarded in the end. That's my personal opinion.
Good insights, Christina or Shaulita.
I think that's something that I just got to Sight and Sound about a month ago, but that's something that we've been talking about. And that's something that they told me about when I came in, because we're only really on Facebook and Instagram, but there's all these other story sharing platforms and big on stories. So why don't we go into TikTok? Like, why don't we go into Snapchat? Like, doesn't it make sense? And something that I was thinking about is, does it help our mission? Like, is our audience on those platforms? Like, are our audience members the younger people who are on TikTok? They may or may not buy the buy the tickets to come see the show. So just thinking about that is important and helpful. And I think the question was about trends. I think something else that I've been realizing is the importance of building relationships on the various platforms that we use. So especially on social, one of the roles that I'm doing now is moderating the comments and questions that people send us via direct message and on posts, just interacting with people there. And it's really fruitful, I think, to see how it's really fruitful for them to like actually talk back and forth with us about their experiences, or yeah, so that's a trend, I think, too. Hopefully it's a good one that lasts. Is building relationships through these digital platforms.
I guess a trend or a tool that I've seen people use a lot is Canva. So that's becoming very trendy and it's super easy to use. So that's a helpful tool to put in your pocket for designing and editing flyers and content and graphic.
Do you use that in your work, Shaulita? Do you use Canva?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I use Canva and Photoshop and Adobe, but Canva, people
Okay.
have been moving to Canva more.
Okay. Well, hey, I just have to say this is warming my heart that the comments, particularly Megan and Christina, what you're sharing about which is essentially audience-centered communication, right? Oh my goodness, I preach this in the classroom. Oh, this is so good to know that as someone who got into this industry well before social media, you're right at the root of this stuff. It's so good to know that trends, they do come and go, but some of those basic principles of communication, audience-centered communication, the kinds of things certainly that we study at Gordon, it sounds like they're still bearing out, which is really good news to know from your report from the front lines of the industry. That's really fascinating. Well, let's talk a little bit about the pandemic, because this has certainly shaped the way that all of us are living and doing work. The very fact that right now we are all in various places around the country and yet joining together in this virtual space on Zoom. Let's talk a little bit about how you have had to pivot in your work, ways in which maybe for those of you, if you were at this particular job before the pandemic, or if you entered, I know Christina, this is a new role for you, how you have either changed in your work because of the pandemic or just the changes that you have seen. How have you pivoted? Megan, if you want to start this one, because you said your work is fully online or fully remote. Is that because of the pandemic, or is that just the nature of the job in general?
Yeah, so I actually just started this job in March. To my understanding, so I'm on basically what would be the national team because it's an addiction treatment center. So there are clinics in 6 states right now, but then there's also the national team. So software engineers, leadership team, people who are working in our kind of call center, people who are working on the marketing team, all of that is the national team, and everyone on the national team is remote. And I think that's a decision the company made early on. And look, I think the reason that it works is that you can hire, in the company's perspective, you can hire the top talent no matter where they live. So you can get the right person for the job without the bounds of will they move here or do they already live within like a 30-mile radius of this circle. So it's great for companies. I actually, in my last role, I did a lot more blogging during the pandemic. And so I wrote a few articles about sort of like the financial benefits of working from home, and from both an employee and an employer perspective, it's incredibly financially beneficial. Because on the employer's end, they don't have to stock the office with toilet paper all the time and snacks, and they don't have to pay for a workspace if you're remote. So it saves them a lot of money, but you also don't have to pay for gas, and you generally get certain things comped, whether it's like the equipment that you use, or some places will comp your internet, or they'll give you a certain amount toward like taxes for your workspace. Like my workspace is tax deductible because it's for my job. So all of that is really nice. The job I was in before transitioned into becoming a fully remote company. So it was in person, and then we went remote for a while, and then they opted not to renew their lease. And as far as I know, they're still fully remote. So I think it's a decision a lot of companies made. Maybe one of the very few benefits of the pandemic was just people realizing that they can work from home. And I think Shaulita mentioned like work-life balance earlier. And I think that is, I think what it provides is now if I need to get up and get a snack during the day, it's my food and it's over there. And if my dog needs to go on a walk in the middle of the day, I can do that. And I have that flexibility. And for parents that are working from home, I mean, I don't know how you're managing it, but you can also do that and you have a lot more flexibility with it. So I think the pandemic definitely made working from home very prevalent, and I think people want it now more than ever. So it's definitely the way people are moving for sure.
That's great. Thanks, Megan. And for Shaulita and Christina, are a mix of remote or in person? What is the situation with your jobs right now? And maybe there are other ways too that the pandemic has impacted your work.
So I have an example. So when so right now currently mixed, so 2 days in, the rest of the days in at home, which is okay. But I like it fully. I liked when we were fully remote. When the pandemic first hit, it was during our walk season, which is one of our biggest fundraisers ever. And it's like 10,000 people come out in Boston and walk on Mother's Day, right? To support one another and to support families. And it was in the middle of that. Planning for that, we raised $400,000. We're trying to raise $400,000 every year, and that was something I had to take on and kind of lead the efforts to. How are we going to do this? We need to raise these monies. We need to still be there for the family. How are we going to do this in a virtual setting? And so that was something I had to, kind of work on when the pandemic first hit, was working with our team to plan a virtual aspect to a walk, a physical walk where you can still feel that community energy, but not be present with each other for safety reasons. And it was crazy because that was the first year we reached our fundraising goal. And this year we did it again virtually because we weren't really sure if we could bring that many people together again. And we had to get really creative because everybody zoomed out, right? And you can't just be like, come on Zoom, come on Facebook Live. And so we found ways to walk together in the 25 days leading up to the walk, kind of like a challenge. And so the pandemic really, for me, challenged me to be more creative, me and my team to be more creative in the ways in which we engage people online. So it's not just look at us on screen, and it's been really fun to see how people are sending in photos of them participating, and the different people who are participating in our broadcast and our lives and everything like that. But yeah, to answer your question, I am 2 days in and the rest of the week remote.
Hey, give us a little more of some of those details. That just sounds fantastic. Congratulations on meeting that fundraising goal. That is really significant, especially during a pandemic. So you said finding more creative ways. So you said, what was it, the 25 days? What was it leading up to and it was a virtual walk, or did people walk like on their own, but on the same day, same time?
Yeah, so basically for the first year we had like a live broadcast with NEC and NBC 10 Boston on Facebook Live. So we worked with them to put a live broadcast on. And then this year we're like, we can't do that again. People are not the momentum's like dying. So we decided, this is our 25th year actually of doing the walk. So we're like, let's do 25 days of walking. And so what it basically is we give people 25 activities in the 5 weeks, 25 days leading up to the walk. So like a total of 25 days, which the walk is on Mother's Day. And so basically we had just like mindfulness activities. We had art activities. We had peace in action because we teach the value of peace. And we also had physical walk challenges for participants to take part in. So the different teams sent in their photos. We had about 30 plus teams participate, and we had about 130 teams register. But that's a good amount of people for the first year. This was like our pilot project to just see people get excited about it and participate. And so on Mother's Day, we had another live broadcast of NEC and NBC 10 Boston and had a lot of elected officials tune in. And we even had the NFL players be a part of our live broadcast as well, which was really, really awesome to just find, different people to be involved in the walk and different ways to do the walk. And so we're looking forward to starting to walk in person again next year, but also keep that virtual aspect because we have more for reach with the virtual aspect.
Yeah, that's great. And just thinking about as we certainly are still in the pandemic, maybe transitioning out, right? I guess we don't quite know at this state, but maybe there's some of those things that we've learned of ways to do work that maybe we want to hold on to going into the future, certainly. Christina, talk a little bit about how the pandemic has impacted your work.
Yeah, so last March, I was working for a church in New York City at the time of the pandemic, and that was a job that I had just started about 2 weeks or 3 weeks before the city shut down. That was a very interesting experience, and challenging. But I think one of the things that we all realize, and not just at the church, but likely worldwide, is how important it is to maintain strong digital presence. So one thing that we had just started right when I got there was a weekly email communication to not just our congregation, but to anyone else who is interested in the church. The church is Times Square Church, so it's a known name. And so there were people who were interested in what we were doing who weren't actually in New York City. Anyway, so that was something that we realized. We were grateful that we really credited the timing of it to God, because we had just started 2 weeks or so before the city shut down, which nobody was expecting. And so I think that was something that was really big, as we realized this is really important, to have these digital ways of communicating with our congregation, and anyone else who's interested, our stakeholders, and also realizing that the digital isn't going to go away. I think Shaulita mentioned it, just that, yeah, you do the walk again next year, but you probably should keep the virtual component. It's become something that we all expect and like and need. I don't know about need, but definitely like it, having that option. So Megan and Shaulita said a lot, so I don't want to, but hopefully those are different aspects of some of the changes that we've experienced.
Yeah, no, that's great, just to hear how the ways that the pandemic has impacted your specific jobs. Well, let's dial this back a couple of years. It's been a little while since you were a college student at Gordon College in the Communication Arts program. But if you can remember way back then, let's talk a little bit about your experience at Gordon, and maybe help connect some of the things you learned there with what you're doing now for the students or prospective students who might be watching this conversation. What would you say are some of the communication skills that you learned when you were a student at Gordon in the Communication Arts program that you're still using today? Are there some things that you can name or identify that you know somehow were connected to what you learned, or maybe an internship or work that you did when you were at Gordon? And anyone, feel free to jump on.
I know I just answered the last question, but someone told me when I went into communication arts, they were like, brace yourself for a lot of group projects. And I was like, oh man. And they were right. We had our fair share of group projects, but life in communication arts is group projects. Like, so that's something that's very real. Just figuring out who's going to be the leader. Sometimes you're leader in some projects, and sometimes you're not the one, and to know what your position is in any given group, and then how you're supposed to handle yourself accordingly. That's something that I started learning doing those group projects as a Comm Art student, and continued to experience in internships and in the jobs, both the jobs I had in the communications field, and also the one I had in retail before that. So that was a big one. Collaboration and group projects.
Yay, group projects. All right. Now I want to go assign even more of them this year based on your recommendation. Thanks, Christina. Megan or Shaulita?
I think the thing that stuck with me and will forever stick with me and is so helpful in my career is your why. Never forget your why. Your why. When you start a new campaign, you always go back to your why. That is your central point. And your why keeps you rooted, your why keeps you grounded, and your why keeps you evolving as well.
Well said.
Yeah, I love that. I was gonna say, I think mostly because I mentioned it earlier, I'm really like stuck on this idea of like thinking about the other person you're communicating with, whether it is when you're working on like group projects, or if you're working on a larger like marketing campaign. I just think it's just always helpful when you have, I mean, conflict with somebody that you're working with, or when you're coming up with a social strategy, or when you're thinking about, even if you're just thinking about like a postcard that you get in the mail and what might we want to be on that, you have to picture yourself being the person receiving it. And you can think of it in terms of what you would want to see on there, like the amount of times that I talk about like direct mail stuff. So anything that you would get in the mail, I'm always like, if it were anything but a postcard, I would throw it away before looking at it. So it has to be a postcard because that's the only thing that has a chance of at least getting my attention. So I feel like that's probably true for most people. And I just think putting yourself in the audience's shoes, audience being literally whoever you're dealing with, it's never going to hurt you. You can only have a more informed strategy that way. And it's just helpful to be empathetic in general. It will only benefit your work. So I think that's something that I definitely picked up there and has continued to benefit me. That's all that I'm like driven by is just like, what does that other person want? So I think that's the most helpful thing about communications. Thank you, Shaulita. I like the claps. I don't know how to react, but I so appreciate it.
Well, let's talk. Oh, go ahead, Christina.
If I may, something else that like we talk about all the time in comm arts is who's receiving the message and how will they receive it based on their everything. And that's something that I think about a lot and how I talk to coworkers all the time. Just like, okay, this is what I think about it, but like what, based on what I know about them, like what do they value? And then how can I phrase it in such a way that they'll understand the importance of it? Like sometimes you have to like sell a problem to a manager. And so that's something that you know, I'll take into consideration in those kinds of conversations as well.
Love this audience-centered communication. So important. Let's talk about advice that the three of you might have for students. And I want to ask it in like two parts, if it helps to think of it in two different ways, because I'm just thinking the students currently at Gordon are just at different places of their lives or academic careers. So I guess the first one I would say maybe, and let's talk seniors, those who are starting their final year at Gordon, maybe are really intrigued by the kinds of work that you all are doing, maybe want to work with you at your organizations. Let's start there, advice you'd have for graduating seniors, and maybe even specific to networking, like how would you recommend that they just start looking for these kinds of jobs? Maybe something that you did you found helpful, or just general advice for those graduating seniors or looking for work. If they haven't yet, they will be very soon.
I always say be patient with the process. And when I feel like for me personally, when I graduated college, I didn't have a job right out, and I felt really bad about that. And I want to advise other people, don't take the rest that you need in that space, but also keep working and keep looking. Go to all the job fairs, set up informational interviews. Like informational interviews are so important because they just plug you into different spaces you don't even know you need to be in. And even though it doesn't lead you to your job now, you don't know what other job it might lead you to in the future. So that period when you just graduate and you don't have a job, find ways to rest, but also plug yourself into the spaces that you need to, and know that the job does come, and know that the place you need to be, you will get there.
Yeah, I love that, and I fully agree with that. I think the patience is something I almost wish that I would have known more. Before my first job, I was working in retail, and I think I was just like so desperate to have like a real grown-up post-grad job that I applied to so many places, and I like took the first one that I was offered, and like I made a lot of connections there, I guess, in some ways, but there was a lot about the job that I didn't like. And even like I remember my first month there, I was like, I remember explicitly thinking like, this is just a short job. Like you can leave in a year if you want to, like it's okay. But I think just the amount of like stress and anxiety that job caused me, I was so much happier working in retail. And I was just like, we have these like conceptions in our minds of like what I should and shouldn't be doing. And I just like, I would be fine just going back and being like, just be patient. Like retail was great. The upside of retail is as soon as you leave the job's done. Like, you've done it, you get to socialize, like it's pretty low stress in terms of like an emergency. And I tell myself in communications, our jobs are also low stress in terms of like what is an emergency. But whatever's an emergency in retail is like not, I'm not like in the ER, like nobody's gonna die. Like it's just somebody like stole something from the front room. Like that's the emergency. And that kind of stress is nice because you leave the job and you've left it behind. But I think because I rushed into my first job, I just spent 2 years just being stressed out all the time. I really learned that coming into this job. I applied to a lot of places and I had several interviews with like other places, and there were just trust your instincts. There were places that just weren't right, and it just felt like it in the interview. Anytime you ask a place what their work-life balance is like and they answer with, we just work really hard here, that's never the right place for you. So always trust your instincts and be patient. I like echo Shaulita in that so much.
There is so much to share based on what I've learned in, I guess, the 3 or 4 years, I don't know how long, since I finished. So I think the persistence is huge. Something else that I learned is to also be prayerful. I feel like the jobs that I did get, I was like, wow, I never would have expected to work for Times Square Church. I never would have expected to work for Sight and Sound. But this being prayerful also about the opportunities that God might have for me was really helpful. Something else that I learned is to keep my passions alive, even if I'm not working in the field. So like when I got out, like Megan mentioned, I was in retail too. And I was like, okay, I'm here and I have all this education. But like I started volunteering for churches and other like nonprofit organizations. I was taking photos, I was doing videos, and it was also helpful for me to delve into some other areas of communication to see which one I really wanted to settle in and work in. Something I really like about Gordon is that I did get to experience a lot. And so afterwards, just kind of doing these various things to keep my passion alive, because sometimes it gets hard if you're working in retail and you know, yeah, it can get challenging, but that's something that really helped me. Something else, every job can be valuable. So like when I was working retail, I was at Barnes & Noble, I was a barista, but I had opportunities for growth. So I took them. So they offered me to be a shift to lead. And I said, yeah, and that I learned a lot about leading a team there and working with a lot of bosses, because there was like 3 or 4 store managers and my immediate manager was on maternity leave. So I was like, you know, I don't know, I wasn't a manager, but you know how they kind of pass on the responsibilities. So it was learning how to handle some of those kinds of encounters with customers that were difficult there in that job. And those lessons really carried on into my first job in the field and now my second job in the field. And so like every experience can be valuable. And so like learn as much as you can wherever you are and just keep your passion alive. And eventually, like we all landed. So even if it takes some time.
So glad that you mentioned that, Christina, and especially at least 2 out of the 3 were in retail. I don't know, Shaulita, were you in retail as well at some point in your career?
I was just about to say we all have the same story. We all worked retail and was like, what are we doing here? And I just wanted to say one more thing. Like, that's so funny that we all have the similar experience. And to you guys' point about keep your passion alive, I saw this quote that says, when you graduate school, you got to be intentional about living. And so don't get when you get that job, don't get super consumed with it. You know, remember you're a person outside of it and explore those as well.
This is so good. Actually, 4 of us, retail right here. Yep, I was working as a radio announcer. Let's see, I stopped one radio announcing job, but I had the overnight shift. This is in Portland, Oregon. It was like an adult alternative station. It was awesome, but it was the night shift. It's like the lowest. And then so during the days I worked retail, and then went to my night job. And it what is it about communication in retail? I don't know. Is this a trend?
I don't know, but sometimes I miss it. It's just you find the job that works for you. And I I don't think that I had the patience for retail every day, but there are a lot of benefits to retail. And I think it's also just a lot of us are fairly social people, and retail works pretty well for that.
There you go, right? Using all those good interpersonal communication skills, even
Yep.
in retail. But I love this idea, especially for our graduating seniors who are looking to get into the various aspects of the communication industry, that to be patient, that is such an important message. And it sounds like all of you have lived through that and are now well on your way into using all of those gifts and skills that God has given you and that you have developed certainly in your time at Gordon. But I know we're quickly running out of time. I have just a couple of more questions. Let's go back to the other side of the advice question, because certainly there'll be some new students, maybe prospective students who will be watching this conversation. What would you say to those students who are just starting out in communication arts at Gordon College? Any advice that you would have for them?
I don't know that this would be all the advice I would offer because I can't think of it all on the spot, but I would definitely say like don't bind yourself to one part of communications. I think when I started out, I really wanted to do video production, and that's what I was like focused on mentally. And then I had an internship after my freshman year, I think, and it was supposed to be for a video internship, but it was supposed to be for video production, but I ended up doing a lot of like content writing because it was just where the need was for that company. And I was like, I didn't know you could get paid for this. This is pretty fun. And then I got a job at Gordon doing that. And then that helped me get my job after college doing it, which helped me get this one. So I think just kind of like, I'm a big fan of intuition and just kind of letting life go where it goes. So I think just don't box yourself in and be open to being outside of communications. Like I just think communications in general is such a broad field, and the things that you learn in communication arts at Gordon are valuable enough that they're applicable to almost any job. So I don't think you need to end up in communications. I think you can, afterwards go back and get your master's in biology. Like there's plenty that you can end up doing and still benefit from a lot of these lessons. But I think it just makes you a better communicator, which ultimately makes you like a more valuable person to kind of interact with in general. So it's incredibly helpful. I feel like I can express myself, and I'm quickly realizing something that people are not all able to do. So don't box yourself in. Just gonna circle back to that.
So great, Megan, thank you. Christina or Shaulita, any advice for those new students?
I guess one is to pay attention in class. The other one is to build relationships with professors. So like, that's why I'm here now, because I emailed Dr. Gardner and she's like, oh, we're having this thing. So like, just to be mindful of that, like asking questions and just being engaged, and how, it's nice to start to build those relationships earlier on. That's all I could think of offhand, but.
This is great, thank you.
Similar to Christina, apply yourself in class. College is really about theory learning, and you're gonna kind of miss that when you get in the field. Like it's more so practical in the field, and theory is really fun. So enjoy it while you have it.
This is so great. I know our time is nearly at an end, and so to the three of you, let's continue this conversation in person. Yeah, one of these days on the Gordon campus, let's go to the bistro, buy a coffee, so we can not do it virtually like this. But let's end on this question. And I know, Ryan, I'll toss it back to you after that if you have some follow-up things for our panelists. But our theme this summer is really a follow-up to our Fine Arts Festival theme from last summer, which is right when the pandemic was starting. But I know we're still in the pandemic. Maybe this is a new normal. So the question that I want to end on is, what do you think the role of, we've been saying art, is in the new normal, but let me make it more specific. What is the role of communication arts in whatever this new normal is that we are entering into this fall? How would you see that, the role of in kind of not really pandemic anymore, but like the new normal in the midst of pandemic? That's a big one. That's a big question.
Yeah, that's a big one for almost 8 p.m.
We need another hour, right? Now that's
It's
the one
late
that
after
when
dark,
we get to the bistro over coffee, we'll finish that question.
Right.
Just start an answer.
Yeah, I ultimately just think the role of communications is just to be honest. I think that's something we all sat by ourselves for a year and thought. And I think now we have to do a lot of unpacking about that. And I think no matter what role you're in, your job is to be honest. And I think that will reach a lot of people. If you can express yourself clearly through communication and understand what other people are going through, I just think that can be incredibly valuable in your work. And I think it's sort of like your responsibility. You know, we've like lived these curated marketing campaigns for too long. Now's the time to be real.
This is definitely the beginning of the answer. So I just think in this time, like adapting communication arts means adapting and evolving with the time that we're in.
So for our jobs, I think that it's important to like continue to listen well. Like Megan was saying, we have kind of been all by ourselves thinking a lot, and so it's a time for a lot of expression and listening, and then also as a form of respite, as a form of rest, as a form of processing. I think communication arts is important, especially when it comes to writing and reading, and then trying to draw people into an experience through your words or helping them to, I'm repeating myself a little bit, but I think those are the big things. So expression and rest and listening well to people is really, really important.
This is a great note to end on. Honesty, being honest, adapting to the times, listening well, taking time to rest. Good advice as we approach this fall as the pandemic continues. Let me just give a thanks to Megan and Shaulita and Christina for your time. This has really been a joy to catch up with the three of you. Ryan, thank you for your work in organizing this. Let me toss it back to you as we wrap up.
Sure. Yeah, big thanks to the three of you again for being our panelists this evening. I'll just say a huge thank you to all of our other alumni guests who have hosted other festival sessions this past year. Yeah, summer's just flown by. I can't believe it's already August, but yeah, it's just been a blast getting to network and connect with new people and reconnect with some old friends and alums. Yeah, it's just been great getting to have these conversations in our department even after graduation. Yeah, again, all the recordings for our sessions are available at gordon.edu/fineartsfest2021. And yeah, just thank you again. If anybody has any questions for our panelists tonight, or you want to keep the conversation going, probably the easiest thing to do would just be to email me. You can email me at gordoncollegefinearts@gmail.com, and I can definitely get you in touch. I'm sure you can definitely keep the conversation going and grab some coffee sometime. But yeah, I think that pretty much covers it. Unless anybody else has any final words, I think we're all set.
Thanks, everybody. Really nice to see you all.